At this time, I would like to call up the chair of the Windsor-Essex Regional Chamber of Commerce, Dr. Janice Forsyth. Janice.
Good morning. Before I introduce Grace Macaluso, our moderator for our next session, I'd just like to thank everyone for coming today. I think it's really important that we support events like this to have critical conversations about the automotive sector. So thank you for attending and being here today. I also want to acknowledge Matt, Marianne, and Barb, Matt in particular, this is very passionate about this work and has worked tirelessly to get this event off the ground. So thank you, Matt, and all the staff at the Chamber for all your hard work. So it's my pleasure to introduce our moderator for Session 2, Grace Macaluso. Grace began covering the auto industry for the Windsor Star just as Chrysler and General Motors entered bankruptcy in the United States. So some exciting times when she started. She launched her journalism career at Canadian Press Broadcast News in Toronto in 1982 with a 3-year stint at CP's Edmonton Bureau. In 1988, she joined the Windsor Star, a move that garnered several industry awards, including a National Newspaper Award for team-produced series of stories on shift work. A native of Hamilton, Ontario, she studied journalism at Ryerson University in Toronto. Her education continues every day on the job, reporting on an industry that is undergoing dramatic change and facing formidable challenges. And we'll hear a little bit more about that in our next panel. Join me in welcoming Grace to the stage.
First, I'd like to invite our panelists onto the stage, as well as the Honourable Perrin Beatty, the CEO and President of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, my apologies, and Jerry Dias, Unifor National President. Jerry and Perrin will be more formally introduced later in the program. Okay, I'd like to begin with introducing our panel. A Windsor native, Nick Marentet's more than 35 years' experience in the global automotive industry started in 1979 at General Motors. Following Lear's acquisition of the Windsor GM trim plant in 1996, Marentet was transferred to Europe, where he became director of multiple facilities in the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Poland, and France. In 2008, he joined the Toyota Group of companies and became Executive Vice President of Toyota Boshoku of Europe. He then became President of Bokoshu Automotive and would oversee operations as well as research and development in the Americas, South Africa, Asia, and Europe. He was promoted to the board of directors and became the first non-Japanese managing officer in the 100-year history of Toyota Boshoku Japan. In 2015, Marentet returned to Windsor and opened his own consulting firm, Marlowe Global Business Solutions. His current client base includes Tier 1 and 2 suppliers who service such global automakers as GM, Toyota, BMW, and Daimler. Wasim Habash is Vice President Academics at St. Clair College. An industrial engineering graduate from the University of Windsor, Habash began his career as an industrial engineer in the food industry. In 1990, he started his own consulting engineering business and enrolled in graduate studies at the U of W. He subsequently launched a 13-year career serving in a variety of leadership positions with Tier 1 auto suppliers and became an expert in lean manufacturing. He joined St. Clair College in 2010. Windsor native Anthony Papa is Senior Vice President, Global Human Resources at Federal Mogul Motor Parts, one of the industry's oldest and most respected global parts manufacturers. His career spans more than 30 years and several countries, and has led to an expertise in international business and labor negotiation. Papa has had a hand in building more than 10 new state-of-the-art auto manufacturing facilities, R&D centers, distribution centers, and regional headquarters around the world. Windsor native Mark Nada is president of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, a post he's held since January 1994. His auto industry career spans more than 3 decades. As CVMA president, he is responsible for the development of policy and the overall strategic direction of the association, which represents Canada's largest OEMs. He has served as the auto industry representative on several federal and provincial government consultative groups, including climate change and Canada's delegation to the negotiation of the Canadian-U.S. Transboundary Agreement on the ground-level ozone transport. He has provided the industry's perspectives on multilateral trade negotiations at the WTO and provided input to Canada's negotiators on trade agreements with South Korea and more recently the CETA, TPP, and Japan negotiations. Based in Windsor, Dr. Peter Fries works with several automotive companies in his current capacity as scientific director and CEO of Auto 21 Network of Centres of Excellence, Canada's automotive research and development program. Since 2001, Auto 21 has partnered more than 500 top Canadian researchers with more than 400 industry and public sector organizations. Auto 21 and its partners have completed approximately $140 million worth of automotive R&D and generated more than 320 patents, licenses, and commercialization agreements. Ladies and gentlemen, your panel. Okay, I'm going to begin my first question directed to Nick Marentet. Okay. Nick, we've heard that, and we're all painfully aware of the fact that Canada is losing out to jurisdictions in the southern U.S. and to Mexico when it comes to new capacity automotive investment. How do the federal and Ontario governments establish a winning culture when it comes to attracting new auto investment?
Okay. For the federal and provincial government to help, I think you have to ask yourself a basic question. Where do we want to be? Who do we want to be? I mean, I was fortunate enough to live quite a long time in Europe. I spent a lot of time living in Germany. And for me, it was very clear that Germany is synonymous with the automotive industry. Unfortunately for us, we don't have our own car company. We borrow other car companies. There is no Canadian car company that's ours. We have Chrysler, Ford, GM, and others, but in Germany, I mean, BMW is Bavaria, and Bavaria is BMW. So there is a strong link between the government, the people, and the automotive industry. So I'm back home now. I'm trying to get a feel for that here, how we think. I also worked in the Toyota Group quite a while. I spent a lot of time in Japan. I mean, Ray's here with us today. Great to have Ray here. So we can understand that when you think of Japan, you think of the automotive industry. You think of Toyota, you think of Honda. The Chinese have their own car companies. We don't. So I think in some ways it puts us at a bit of a disadvantage. So we can't be equal to others, whether you're talking about an OEM or a Tier 1 or a Tier 2. If an investment is going to occur, Michigan has some advantages over us. For a matter of fact, if you're considering making an investment, that investment is more likely to come in Michigan than Ontario, all things being equal. So we can't be equal. We have to be better. You know, and there is no such thing, by the way, as second place. So someone mentioned mentors earlier. I had a very good mentor, Rodney O'Neill. He was CEO over at Delphi, and Rodney always told us in our business, second place is first loser. So there's no such thing as second place in our business. You know, if you win the silver medal in the Olympic Games, you'll always remember it. If you win the second place at the Golden Gloves in the state of Michigan, you can always remember it. But in our gig, there is no such thing as second place. There's winners and losers. So my advice to the federal and provincial government, you have to listen to what the investors need and what the companies need and make a roadmap for success. So, you know, I spent most of my career in the Tier 1 industry. And in our industry, we have to look at our competitors. So what is the competitive advantages? Is our labor cost cheaper? Are our conditions for transportation less expensive? Do we have more purchasing power over our competitors? So we have to do a deep dive analysis. I would propose the same. Maybe it's already been done. This I can't answer for the province of Ontario or our federal government, but whether it's an OEM, Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, where are we versus the competition throughout the Midwest, the southern United States, and in Mexico? How can we become more competitive? If I can speak freely, and I will, I know that I work with a lot of the German, Japanese OEMs, and when I was even with the Keiretsu on the board with Toyota Boshiko, one problem we have in our country is the cost of energy. So if you're looking for an investment of a large scale where you're hiring thousands and thousands of employees and a lot of equipment and machinery, we're at a significant disadvantage. Just one example. So we have to attack that, all right? Other areas we're extremely strong, and I'm proud to say, since I've been back, we have such a great, strong reputation in Canada and in this area for skilled trades. So I won't take up any more time on that, but there are areas where we are the strongest in the world, that I really believe that, but there are definitely areas where we have to take a look at it and do a deep analysis and compare ourselves to the other regions and say, what can we do and what can't we do?
So Canada needs to sort of develop a roadmap and assess its strengths and weaknesses. Tony, would you like to weigh in on this in terms of what we need to do is, again, to establish a winning culture, an attitudinal shift?
Well, again, I'll just sort of echo a bit of what Stephen said earlier on. We're positioned geographically in the most perfect and most advantageous position possible. The issue is trying to work collaboratively across all the lines. I've had the good fortune of negotiating and brokering multi-million-dollar stimulus deals across the world. And when I go and deal with those levels of government, various branches, whether it's in Turkey, Mexico, China, I've spent significant time in the lower states in the United States, and all of them come to the table with one thought in mind, and that is to do a deal. Okay? They cut through the red tape. They cut through the bureaucracy to bring one level. Most of those countries that 20 years ago had no automotive industry to speak of have developed branches that are just dedicated to the auto industry because they see it as a significant stimulus in their economy. Therefore, they form these branches so that you don't have to develop relationships with the federal, the provincial, or the state, or the municipal levels, or the regional levels, and cut through all of those levels of government and various levels of bureaucracy and red tape because they want to come to a deal. So I think all of that really is possible because we're certainly knowledgeable in the game. We've been in the game for well over 100 years. So it's not new to us, quite frankly, and therefore if we can just work collaboratively across those lines, we certainly can make much more improvements than where we're at today.
Okay. My next question is for Wasim. My apologies. We all know a highly skilled workforce is key to ensuring Canada's auto industry can compete in the global arena. What are the biggest challenges facing post-secondary institutions like St. Clair College when it comes to ensuring graduates have the required skills and training?
If you listen to what Steve talked about, the innovation is developing so rapidly in the automotive sector, basically in every sector right now. What we're finding is there's a skills mismatch or a skills gap, but not necessarily just in our region or in the province. It's North America wide, and Nick and I have talked about that in the past. What we need to do, number one, I think one of our challenges is reaching out to parents and to young students and advise them to get into skilled trades in engineering, into the science and technology fields that this sector needs. I think we need data on the types of jobs that are available for them, the wages that are available to them, and the fact that I think talking to many parents, they think that these jobs are still very cyclical. And even though locally they might be cyclical at times, globally they're not. And now with the virtual jobs that are coming on board, a graduate here can work out of out of their office or out of their home, for any place in the world. I think we need to better promote that. One of our other challenges is staying in touch and ahead of where the innovation is in industry. And I think what we need there is, for example, we just received the Strategic Investment Fund by the feds, and we submitted 3 proposals. We had 4 weeks to put that together. I think we need more time when these initiatives come out, so that there is more dialogue with industry to find out what is it that you need us exactly to do. How do you want those programs prepared? What kind of equipment do you need? If we look at the Ford Center for Excellence in Manufacturing, we're looking at putting a precision metal cutting integrated and automated system in that facility. We're reaching out to industry. We're asking for input on what is it that we need? What kind of innovation do we need in there? I think we have to do a better job in reaching out to industry, but we also need industry to work with us in terms of, and the government, in terms of the funding that's required and the placement and the work experiential learning opportunities for students. So basically, those are the challenges that are facing us today, and that's where for us to be supportive of industry, we need to be on the cutting edge of technology. We need to be right alongside with them so that we can provide the research and development and train students for 5 years from now. If I'm training students for today's technologies, I'm too late. We need to be training for technology that's coming at us.
Anthony, could you paint a picture for us on how other countries, say like Germany, support collaboration between post-secondary institutions and industry?
Yeah, certainly. So I can just sort of piggyback a bit about what Wasim said. When you go to Germany, and I'll even give you China as well and Turkey, they come to do that deal and they bring their departments of education or their ministries of education officials with them. They work collaboratively to try to ensure that industry, trade, and commerce, as well as the people that are going to be ultimately working in those locations, understand what you need, not today, but for 5 to 10 years from now. So while we're looking at things like 3D printing and lightweighting today, that's great, fabulous. Autonomous driving vehicles, fabulous. But that's been around for 10 years, I must tell you. So they've been looking at that in many of their skunk works and their think tanks for years in Germany and in China. So they bring those people involved up front and make sure that the educational people or those who are driving the educational systems in those countries are preparing the next generation of labor, the next generation of talent to support that industry. There's no sense of attracting high-tech industry, whether it's automotive or aerospace or anything else, if you don't have the labor, ultimately, in the skilled trades to support that business. So it goes without saying that one hand has to be connected to the other.
Okay. And my next question is just for you, Anthony. You have extensive experience opening plants across the globe. Tell us how governments react when you say you're interested in investing in their jurisdictions, and what are the key factors that are employed by those who know how to win? I know that you're going to be going over familiar ground, but let's hear some of your stories.
Yeah, I think I somewhat answered that question already. I'll just give you a very simple example. So Turkey, 20 years ago, as I mentioned earlier on, had no automotive industry to speak of. They've become one of the super nations with regards to the automotive sector in EMEA. Obviously, they have a very fortuitous position with respect to their currency, the lira versus the euro, but they take advantage of that. They've opened up tax-free zones along the Mediterranean. They've opened up significant industrial parks, literally the size of a quarter of Windsor. And then they bring in all of the infrastructure organizations as well. So it's not just looking at OE manufacturing, but they're also looking at significant tier ones. But they're also doing the 3PLs, for example. So if you need a third-party logistics organization, they'll bring all of that in there with them as well. Because again, they're the gateway between Europe and Asia. So think about that. If you take the map and you actually put it flat, where's Turkey? Right smack in the middle. So they're taking advantage of their geographical positioning as well. So when you look at all of that, they've made it such an opportunity to come in, and then they basically do their own general ledger, as Steve had mentioned earlier on. They'll do a bottoms-up type of formula to see exactly what it's going to cost them from an investment perspective. Everyone was talking about a return on investment of less than 3 years. In many of those countries, it's even less than 2 years. So for them, it's a no-brainer because they see that the auto industry can be such a significant driver of their economy that for them to make that type of an investment, they're not worried about saying, well, if we give it to the auto sector, then we have to give it to the agricultural sector or the fisheries sector or the mining sector, et cetera. They're not worried about seeing who's going to be next in line. They're just trying to drive their economy and build an economy. So those third world nations that 20 years ago were not even a blip on our radar screen with respect to the auto industry have now become dominant forces. I'll give you the example of China. China started theirs 20 years ago, essentially. They went to all their tier one cities, 20 million people and above. They've now come quickly, rapidly to the conclusion that they can't compete in those tier one cities. They've now moved to tier two cities, 10 million people and above, and to tier three cities, 5 million people and above, because they've seen that their wage increases in places like Shanghai and Beijing have been jumping between 8 and 12% for the last 10 years. So whatever labor competitive factor that they had before has been eroded. So they've actually moved that business from those tier ones to those tier two, those tier three nations, cities. So they've gone from Beijing and Shanghai now into Guangzhou and Wuhan, for example. So, but they're keeping the business in-house. But they've rapidly adapted. They've realized their limitations, and they've rapidly adapted their industry and their economy to ensure that they can maintain their foothold in the industry.
Okay, thank you. Mark, do you think we need an automotive strategy for Canada with recommendations that would provide guidance on what is needed from governments and industry to create the positive investment climate needed for new auto investment? And what would that look like?
Well, you know, in anticipation of that question, I went back through the Canadian Automotive Partnership Council papers, Call to Action 1, Call to Action 2. You know, what was really interesting there is that there's virtually no difference in the recommendations that were made more than a decade ago versus 2 years ago. So I would submit it's all there. We know what to do, but we haven't done it. So those recommendations need to be acted upon. They need to be, you know, put in place. So I would say, you know, you can call it whatever you want, but we already know what we need to do, and that's the key. But getting from that to the future and recognizing what the future will be for us, whether it's manufacturing or whether it's into some of the disruptive technologies that we're all talking about here in terms of connected vehicles or autonomous vehicles, it's what do we do now, what do we put in place now to recognize what's on the future, or in the horizon, I should say, at least 10 years out, because we all know in the auto industry, our horizon is not 1 or 2, 3 years out, it's at least 10 years out in terms of new investment and new product development, et cetera. I mean, this is what was so interesting about Ontario, and it's not a criticism, but want to get involved in autonomous vehicles and testing and so forth. And we said exactly this, Tony, was, Ben, you know, you're at least 5 years too late. So we've got to get ahead of the bus, otherwise we're going to get run over the bus, and that means we have to take a look at what would really facilitate, you know, new investment, capitalizing on not just the investments we have today in terms of our existing manufacturing plants, but what would it take, perhaps, although probably quite unlikely, to bring new investment, greenfield investment into the province. Those are the key things. And there's many things, for instance, other countries are doing this. I don't think we are so well, which is they're looking at, you know, new investment, what's necessary, and they're looking at that through the lens of regulatory development policies as to what will not just provide or deliver the public policy objectives, but what will it mean in terms of a thriving industry? What will it mean in terms of competitiveness of that industry? And I don't think we're doing that at this point in time. We still see various ministries, and we have many touch points with the regulatory agencies. And silos are there. We've got to knock down the silos. We've got to make sure that the ministries collaborate with one another and coordinate. And it's looking through that lens of what, not just achieving the public policy at all costs, but what would be put in place to actually foster a long-term competitive manufacturing industry. So what is really good for auto industry, quite frankly, would also be good for manufacturing, generally speaking.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I'd like to contribute to that too, and I think that the previous speakers have all given you examples of what other countries have done and the kind of successes they've had. And Nick pointed out, of course, that we We don't have a domestic OEM here. Neither does Turkey. And look at what they've done. And you know, Germany has 4 or 5 OEMs, and yet one of the highest cost structures in the world. They're virtually landlocked. They have very few sources of natural resources or of energy within their country. Tremendously strong regulations, very high level of unionization and so on, and yet they keep winning. And I think that the common factor, you know, whether it's Germany or India or China or Turkey or Thailand, is that they've treated their auto industry as a key strategic asset for the country. It's not just another industry. And I think that points out the need and the imperative for this particular initiative today. But I think it you know, and as Mark said, I've been at every CAPC meeting since it began. And this has been said every single time. And if we don't do it, we're going to get hurt. We're getting hurt. I mean, you can see that. So I made a list of 4 or 5 things that I think that we could do. The first thing is to recognize Canada and Ontario's place in the auto industry. We don't have a domestic OEM. We do have a very large, powerful assembly segment. We have a large parts segment with some very large companies headquartered here, which are top-notch in the world. We also have one of the best tool, die, and mold segments in the world, and much of it is right here in Windsor. We have a strong labor force. We have proximity to the U.S. We have very strategic free trade agreements. We have a powerful IT segment, but it's not very strongly involved in automotive right now. And as Mark just said, and I completely agree, we're late to the game. And even if we got all of it, all of the IT in the automotive sector, it's still a fairly small part of the overall industry. And what are the chances of us getting all of it? So I wouldn't want to see us go after that shiny new apple and abandon what we have now. Product development is the most important thing in industry. If you have no products being developed today, you'll have nothing to sell tomorrow. And I think that Canada underinvests in product development. So if I had one piece of advice to the government, it would be to foster product development. That's where jobs come from. Jobs don't come from research. Jobs come from product development. Recognize diversity among the OEMs. They're not all the same. They don't all have the same priorities. And you need to listen to the industry. Listen to their concerns. Some of their concerns may not be palatable, but they are real, and they're the people who make the decisions. Energy costs, SR&ED program issues, red tape, incentives, the challenges of just accessing government and all the various bits and pieces you have to do to make a decision. And I think that overall my message would be, and I'm an R&D guy, I ran Canada's largest research network. And I started Canada's first automotive engineering program here at the University of Windsor. The future car, the connected car, the autonomous car, is still going to be a car. And it's still going to need tools and dies. It'll have a powertrain, wheels, suspension, brakes, a body, glass, interior, paint, plastics, metals, all that stuff. It's still going to be a car. There's going to be a lot more to it than just the IT piece. I'm not against the IT piece, but please don't forget the way that Canadians and Ontarians make a living in the auto industry today. And I think that's an important point. Thank you.
That's a great, oh, did you want to add?
Yeah, Grace, I'll just add to that. You know, what really needs to be looked at here is the aggregate impact of the various regulatory issues that impact the industry. Not one issue is going to necessarily sink our competitiveness, but in the aggregate it will and is. So, you know, when we talk about, everybody that today, which is really interesting, everybody today has referenced the electricity costs or energy costs in Ontario. So, you know, the actual cost of the electricity itself may be competitive, but that's not what we go on. We go on delivered electricity costs. So that's all in. And when you do that all in, we're not competitive. You know, typical automotive plant in Ontario versus others in, say, the southern states or mid-states is 2.5 times more the cost. That is something which it does not fit well in terms of that positive equation for new investment. But that said, we've got what we got. We have one of the cleanest grids that exist. The You can also argue that electricity in the southern states is, coal generated. So, when we start talking about climate change agendas, and when we start talking about things like in Ontario cap and trade programs, how you structure that program, okay, we can argue that, yeah, it's going to add to our cost, which if we don't do it correctly, absolutely it will, I can guarantee you. So that makes our assembly plants non-competitive. But what we can do is we structure it properly. How do we offset that differential? And that differential, again, to give you an example, is the differential between a plant in Ontario, a typical plant, and one in say, Texas. That differential is greater than the actual cost of the energy in Texas alone. So when we talk about cap and trade, we're highly trade exposed industry. We are, high risk for carbon leakage. And the last thing you want in our cap, to reduce, climate greenhouse gases under a climate change agenda is for carbon leakage. In other words, we build elsewhere and it emits more emissions than if we did it here. We don't want that, because not only do you fail to achieve your objective, but you also fail in terms of the economic side of the equation, whether it's employment, whether it's contribution to the economy. So it's really critical that we do this correctly, and we can still achieve our public policy objectives. And I can assure you that the auto industry is fully supportive of many of these objectives. But in aggregate, all of these things, whether it's cap and trade, whether it's discussions, and I don't think Ontario is going to do this, but regulating the supply of electric vehicles on the basis that it will create more, it'll cause assembly plants, to make them here, we'll get the new mandate. No, we won't. That is another guarantee. But we have to concentrate on creating demand for those, and that's what you do in that case. But we've got to concentrate on what really makes sense here, what will achieve the public policy objective, but in a way that fosters our industry. And if we don't do that, then I think our longevity is pretty short, to be truthful. We can't sugarcoat it. And we can say, well, other jurisdictions will come and join us, and they will. Everybody is moving to a lower carbon economy, but it's this interim period that scares the hell out of me, because we can lose so much so fast. And I think you raised at the table this morning, is it too late? Well, it's never too late until it's too late, and when it's too late, it'll never come back. So I'll stop there. Sorry for the long-winded answer.
My next question is for anyone who wants to jump in. There's a jurisdiction closer to home that has seen its auto industry rebound since the Great Recession, and that's Michigan. What has Michigan done right since the Great Recession?
They treated it as a strategic asset. And they decided, okay, we're going to do this, and so they did it. And that, incidentally, that's what Finland did. Why was Nokia such the leading cell phone company in the world for a while? Because the Finnish decided it was going to be, and they just did it. And why did Turkey wind up with such a large, powerful auto industry so quickly? Because somebody in the Turkish government decided it was going to be, and they put everything in place, and they drove for that goal. And they didn't mess around with other things, and they didn't make it difficult for the auto industry to decide to invest there. They made it a goal, they made it a strategic goal, and they did it.
I would say also that whether it's Michigan or any of the southern states, so good or bad, I work with a lot of the southern states, so I've gotten to meet Nikki Haley out in South Carolina. I have a lot of respect for her. Whether it's Alabama or any of those other states, I think they have an advantage over us, and I hope that we can close the gap with our provincial and federal government, is that those governors, if the president of Daimler in Alabama or the president of BMW calls, they're jumping, because they're a team, very, very close. I don't know if our provincial and federal government have that same relationship with our OEMs, to be frank. But if you talk to the folks in those states, they are doing whatever it takes. I mean, it's competition between Georgia and Alabama and Tennessee. They want to win. So they fight fiercely, and they're willing to do what it takes to get the business down there. I mean, they also have, and we should understand this, some disadvantages. I don't think we have any turnover at our assembly plants up here in Ontario, zero. But down at BMW and Daimler, I know for a fact they have 4 or 5% turnover every month. And a lot of the suppliers have turnover up to 10% per month. So there's some things that aren't working down there that work much better here. But in the areas where they are ahead of us, we need to close the gap fast.
I think one other key thing is that we all need to work collaboratively. whether it's academia, industry, and government. We have to have a strategy in place, as Peter mentioned, and I think we all have to look at it from the lens that it's not just about me, it's about us, it's about everyone. So I think that's the kind of strategy that we have to go in with.
I'll give you one last comment in Michigan because that's where I work and I live practically every day of my life for the last 20 or so years. Look at the difference between administrations. You look at the previous governor versus the current governor. I mean, Governor Schneider is the biggest cheerleader of the state of Michigan that we've seen in the last 20 years. He has made a commitment to those people that the auto sector and the auto industry is core to their being. He's worked with the UAW. He worked to bring in different legislation, whether it was labor legislation, employment law legislation. He brought in ways of bringing in more stimulus, and he knows he's not just competing globally, but he's actually competing next door with Ohio and Illinois and Indiana. And Ontario, of course. So really, in the States, you know, it's like 50 states competing against one another. They've become razor sharp. It's like college football over there. It's religion. And so you can see the difference with just the difference in administration from Granholm to Schneider. It's night and day.
We're good? Okay. Depending on who you talk to in the industry, there are those who think that Canada should focus its investment efforts on research and development in this industry. While there are others who say, no, we should continue to chase auto assembly jobs. Who's right? Should we focus on R&D or plants?
Can I start, if you don't mind? R&D. R&D is great. Research, but a very wise man once said that research is a way of turning money into knowledge, and development is a way of turning knowledge back into money. And I think that the end game is not research. I mean, I'm a research guy. It's lots of fun, and it certainly has provided me with a good job. But I care about the jobs of all the people out there in Canada land. And the fact of the matter is that research just doesn't create that many jobs. It just doesn't directly. You have to get to products, and then you have to make the products and sell them. And so if we look at our R&D suite of programs, if you like, I think there's a pretty wide variation in success. For instance, in academic research, I think Canada's a leader. We've done very, very well. And that is tremendous. We're a magnet around the world for some of the top students and the top teachers and researchers, and that's been a fantastic thing. The University of Windsor has made automotive a key strategic program, and that's why we have the position we have. The SR&ED program, it's often touted as the most generous in the world, the best in the world, and I think some years ago it was. But I have to say that now it isn't. And I think we need to have a frank assessment of our own programs, and we have to be realistic about it and look around the world at what other people are doing. And I think we would conclude that we're not that competitive anymore on that score. Industry research. A lot of Canadian companies do a very substantial amount of their own research outside of Canada. Why would they do that? It's because they get more public assistance, they have more responsive universities, and so on. And I'm very proud to say the University of Windsor has made it a key strategic priority to be as responsive as possible to industry, and I think that every Canadian university should follow that model. But I think, we could have a great long debate about all this, but I guess, I'm just an engineer, I'm just a pretty simple guy, and I just think, okay, well, overall, if we've been doing things a certain way for a long time, and we're basically proposing to continue to do them that way for the future, let's think about how are we doing? How's this working out for us? In jobs, in investment, in overall national or international competitiveness, in the auto sector, in other sectors. How's it working out? And I think you have to conclude that not so good in some respects, and so we need to re-examine our game. And on the product development score, I think, if you don't do that right, one of the key textbook examples of what can go wrong if you fall off the table on product development is BlackBerry. They invented the whole sector. They owned it. Everybody else was just a footnote. Now they're a footnote. And I don't want that to happen to the rest of Canada's auto industry.
Grace, to try to answer your question, whether it's R&D or assembly,
Both.
I would say it's a multi-pronged approach, right? You can't just focus or put all your eggs in one basket and go after that one area, because if it's either a win or a loss, right? There's no in between. So you have to have a multi-pronged approach. I would turn around and say actually about two degrees separation from R&D is product development. So again, I'm going to echo what Peter said. If our economy or if our industry is known to be strong in product development, invariably high-tech jobs will come, right? And then the infrastructure builds from there. High-tech jobs being IT, scientists, engineering, advanced manufacturing, what have you. With that then comes all of the other things that support it from an infrastructure. Then we go into the Wasim's area. So then you start talking about tooling, mold design, CAD/CAM, machine building companies. We have some of the best. Linamar up in Guelph. Right here locally, the Valiant Group, right? You can go up to Magna up in Aurora. We have some of the largest tier 1 suppliers that are considered to be world renowned in terms of what they do, in terms of advancing technologies. So if we look at product development, the rest will come. But if we turn around and start looking at where are we going to build our next 5,000 man assembly plant, I'm sorry, but I'll tell you, forget it. Don't focus on, that big prize. Build slowly. Build the foundation over again. We've allowed the foundation to have become eroded. So let's rebuild it and start, fundamentally reshaping our auto industry.
I think very important is to get people here. So trade commissions are great, you meet and greet and exchange business cards, but we need to get with the people we have. We have a lot of people in Windsor that have worked abroad. We need to get people here, because when people get a chance to meet people like Dino and meet the owners of our tool shops, it makes a big difference, because I'm finding when I bring people from the German OEMs, senior executives here, they're pleasantly surprised at some of the changes. I lived abroad a long time, so it was very frustrating for me to hear people talk about Windsor like it's 1980 or 1985, or our automotive industry like it's still 1990. That's over, okay? We're very progressive here, and I really like working with Dino and his folks and the team, and proud of our local companies. But you need to get the people here to see the difference and explain to them. So we have to keep investing time with those people. Get them here first to see the difference, to understand the difference, and show them there's a culture that's conducive to growth of the industry.
So Grace, can I just add one more thing to that? I mean, I don't think we could deny the fact that the assembly plant is the anchor for virtually everything else. And if you don't have assembly, you don't have a supply chain. If you don't have that, you're not likely, although you probably will be able to capitalize on some of these new technologies through research and development and innovation. But it really starts to collapse in on itself. So we've got to maintain what we have in terms of assembly if we can. And I think it's a daunting task to suggest we're going to get new greenfield investment, but who knows? If we get the formula right and we change the foundations as you suggest, it looks promising. But clearly, I'm still of the view that assembly provides thousands, literally thousands of jobs, 500,000 across Canada, roughly 400,000 in Ontario, and high value, high paying jobs, which really contributes to a high level of standard or living standard for people here. So, let's try and get it right here. Let's keep what we have, and if we get new stuff, great. But let's keep what we have, because that's what really underpins everything else going forward.
Yeah, Grace, I listening to my friend Tony, that's kind of a scary word. Forget it, but in a way he's right. So what are we going to do about that? I think we need a short-term strategy around R&D and around product development with a long-term goal of bringing assembly back here. If we don't create those steps for us, Tony's right, it'll never happen. We need to be proactive. We need to think about how are we going to accomplish the small steps first. In the end, because Turkey 10 to 20-year plan before they brought a plan. I think we need to do the same thing.
Has anyone here dealt with ProMexico? We hear a lot about ProMexico.
I have.
Okay, so give us some insight into ProMexico and why it's been so successful.
Well, ProMexico is the economic development agency for the country, and I think that the key ingredient is that they have the authority to negotiate on behalf of the country, and it is a one-stop shop. They've cut through the red tape to a very great extent. I think there are still more issues possibly there than many people may realize. I don't think it's a total panacea, but I think that it really has cut through the red tape, and it has made the whole, it's sort of an easy glide path to establish a facility in Mexico to invest there. If you're thinking of investing in Mexico, ProMexico makes it very, very easy to come to that decision. They don't put up barriers. They facilitate with the various approval processes and all the rest of that sort of thing. They make sure that local officials are on board with land and with zoning and all that sort of thing. They assist with facilitating the acquisition of labor. You know, it really is quite a remarkable organization. But the key thing is it seems to have the authority to, and I have to say I don't understand, I don't know intimately what all the legislative aspects of it are, but it seems to have the muscle and the authority to make decisions that stick, and so they seem to be able to make that glide path very easy for investments. You know, I can tell you just a little story. A very large, I won't name any names here, a very large Canadian parts maker was putting a press into a southern Ontario city, not in Windsor. And there were quite a large number of jobs attached to the startup of that press. And the press had been bought from a large European country where, in fact, steel was invented. So I think the initials would be Germany. A country well known for high-quality advanced technology equipment. The press was brought here. It was completely plumbed and wired up. And then an approval agency went in and decided that all of the hydraulic piping had to be changed because it wasn't approved for use in Ontario. It was approved for use in Germany, and that approval would have worked in India, Spain, Argentina, Mexico, wherever, the US, wherever else, but for some reason it just wasn't approved in Canada, in Ontario. And they had to start that press up. These people needed that machine operating. And the company was faced with the choice of either ripping out all the hydraulics and redoing it, which would have taken weeks and cost a lot of money, or moving it to Kentucky and the jobs that went with it. And that's the kind of thing that companies face. And so ProMexico seems to have gotten rid of that kind of thing and basically said, well, gosh, you know, if it's okay for Germany, I'm sure it's fine here. I'm not for a minute suggesting we lower standards or risk the safety of our workers or our people, but at the same time, I think we need a little common sense injected into some of these processes.
So I can certainly tell you, Grace, from experience, I've dealt with ProMexico. I've built at least 3 large factories in Mexico in the last 8 years. 2 in the Juarez area, which is the largest maquiladora in all of Mexico, and 1 in the Monterrey Ramos Arizpe region, which they call themselves now the new automotive capital of North America. So they're trying to take the title away not only from us, but actually from Detroit. And I will tell you, from the day that we met with them to the day that we actually had our SOP, so start of production, 18 months passed. So to Peter's point, to my comment earlier on, they have one branch of government that takes care of all of those things for you and helps you not only just acquire the land, put a spade in the ground, erect a building, but actually dig press pits, put underground scrap conveyors in, Deal with the third-party logistics companies that you're gonna need to help you, move your product in and out, outbound. Deal with the infrastructure that you need from, tool shops, mold shops, machine builders, etc. They help you set up shop completely. If you don't have that infrastructure with you, they'll find it for you. They'll give you 3 options for each one of those. So they're not going to tell you must go to our preferred vendor for this or for that. They give you various options so that you can make, intelligent purchasing decisions. So their strategy is far different than ours. But 18 months to build a facility that was, 300,000 square feet, I thought was quite an accomplishment.
So does everyone here agree that we're not headed toward the same fate as Australia and that it's not too late for our industry?
Well, Grace, I'll come back to what I said. I mean, all these stories, I can give you multiple stories of where, government agency A versus government agency B, they're not on the same page. So whether it's, the costs associated with pension policy and regulation, whether it's workers' compensation costs, whether it's environmental approvals. I can give you another case where, a company wants to put in an energy, efficiency project. They got multiple certificates of approval. They're going to take 2 years to do that. Well, that doesn't cut it anymore. So there's multiple examples, and they continue to happen. So until we start breaking those down, the silos that I spoke of right at the outset, we're going to have a problem. And during this interim period, when others come on board with other climate change issues, we're very susceptible, very vulnerable. And that's what we need to address now. And if we don't do that, well, we'll see what happens.
I agree with my colleagues. I would also say, though, that we have to change, too. So Ray worked in the Toyota Group. He was a managing officer there. Being here back home in Canada, I still get the feeling that we don't recognize that our operators are the most important people in the company. So in a Japanese company, the business model is inverted. So we have a typical triangle in the West with the executives at the top and the workers at the bottom. But in a Japanese thinking, it's inverted, it's reversed. And I still don't get that feeling since I've been back home. I would say the same thing applies for our education. When I talk to my nephews and my nieces and young people here, everybody wants to go to university, and I think university is great for certain people. But in Germany and in Japan, skilled trades is very highly recognized and respected. I still think that our tool and die makers are not respected the same way here or in the United States, for example, as they are in a country like Germany, where they're at the top of the food chain. And things like, I still don't get the feeling in my own country that an operator is felt to be a leader of the company, and they really are the leader. So in the Keiretsu family and Toyota, for example, we have operator competitions, and we have huge respect and admiration. We print newspapers and articles about winning the seat building competition. I don't get that feeling here. That's also part of what needs to change. So it's not just the federal and provincial government. Okay, the mindset that if you're a tool and die maker, you work in a factory, it is very wrong. Tool and die maker is a tremendous occupation and part of our society. Working in the plant on the line, you're a critical element. With the Japanese, we have the end-on system. We can shut the line down. We give complete power and autonomy running the business to the worker. So this is something I still feel we have a little bit of a ways to go. So that's another part of the equation that should be considered and understood.
Do you have further thoughts before we move to audience questions? Okay. All right. Terrific. Let me think of another question then. Yeah, I think we're done. I'm done. All right. Thank you. Oh, great. Okay. Yeah. Just a reminder that we are accepting questions from the audience, so please bring them on. How do independent parts, oh my goodness, I'm not sure I understand the, okay. How do independent parts relate to OEMs, and how do they relate to OEMs being here in Windsor, Is there a benefit of parts plants moving closer to the OEM?
Well, the answer to that question is absolutely. I mean, with the JIT systems that we're all operating within, it's imperative to have your supply base, within a 3-hour distance, especially when you're talking about larger components such as, seats or interior trim. There's no, we'll just give you the microcosm of Windsor. The Intergrand facility that Magnum has on the corner of Patillo and Highway number 2 is there for one reason only, because it's in proximity to the Chrysler, Pacifica plant. So having your tier 1 as well as your tier 2 and tier 3 within proximity of your OEs is incumbent. It's an absolute. It's an entry into the game. There's no other way around it. Having it, beyond those borders or beyond that distance makes it that much more costly in terms of logistics and, more importantly, time for sequencing.
Right. The next question. There are lots of good ideas coming out here today, but how do we move them to action? How do we get governments at all levels to see what other countries are doing to entice investment into Canada and to do similar things?
I mean, that's the essence of the question that we've all been talking about, is we know what to do, we know what the issues are. We can't continue just to play around the edges of the perimeter here, our periphery. I mean, the auto industry is complex, and doing little things here and there helps, but that's not the key. So it's a question about doing it. And you come to the table hungry, and you come to the table hungrier than our competitors in other countries and other states. And so it's get on with it. And we've, as I said, more than 12 years ago, we knew what we had to do, and we're not there yet. So, Mr. Tanguay's got a job here that, he's obviously, committed to, and he's going to deliver, we hope. But those are the things that we need to do. And some of the things are harder than others, but nonetheless, the hard things have to be dealt with as well.
I would imagine, though, that you're right. This has been discussed to death.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, certainly since I started covering the auto industry, and I suspect that if governments are going to move definitively on this, that an auto strategy would have to be something that's put in writing, that is detailed, that includes benchmarks. I mean, what would that document look like?
And a strategy isn't just investment incentives. Some have said, well, we've got an incentive program. No, that's not a strategy in of itself. I mean, a strategy is one which, yes, that's part of. Yes, it's federally and provincially. You need an envelope approach to this. But it's also one that factors in regulatory burden, the costs of doing business here. It's infrastructure, making sure that we have a new international crossing. As an integrated industry, parts, components, everybody knows, goes back and forth across the border as many as 6 or 7 times a day. We have, parts makers that operate on both sides of the border. All of these things really act as one, and they have to act in unison so that we garner the investment and keep what we have. That's the key here. And, as I said, we know what we need to do. But, getting defensive about, policies and, regulations, that's not the key either. Okay, we all agree, let's agree on what the objective is from a public policy standpoint, but let's do it in a way that facilitates and that makes our industry more competitive for the long term.
We share a border, labor, commerce, and resources. How can Ontario and Michigan work closer together on common issues?
Well, that's a tough one, and I'm sure Tony's got some fun words for that, but I think we need to collaborate with our neighbors and try to work more as a region, but I think part of that would be Ontario, and let's face it, if the subject of today was wheat, this wouldn't be happening here, it'd be in Regina, and it would be a Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Alberta conversation. Mm-hmm. This is cars, this is us. This is southwestern Ontario. It's not northern Ontario, it's southwestern Ontario. And that's why it's here. So if for us to work with Michigan, they have to want to work with us. That means they have to take us seriously. That means we have to become comparable to them in the weight and import that we put onto the auto industry and the things that we do with it, for it, and to it. And I think that a frank and honest appraisal of our strengths and weaknesses by us would be worthwhile, and a frank and honest appraisal of their strengths and weaknesses would be worthwhile, and then a conversation with them in which frank and honest views are exchanged. But until we're comparable to them, I don't think they will want to work with us.
So you wouldn't advise our AutoZar to meet with Michigan's AutoZar?
Yes. And our leaders to meet with Michigan?
This is a question about the skills gap. Employers continue to hire tradespersons and don't want to invest in apprenticeship and youth. How do we address that dilemma?
Can you repeat that, please?
Employers continue to hire tradespersons and don't want to invest in apprenticeships and youth. How do we grapple with that?
Okay, I think there's a couple of things there that we need to do. There needs to be an investment in our youth. There needs to be an investment in training our students or the next generation. I think what needs to happen is there needs to be some time in terms of the basics, the fundamentals that the students need to gain in the early stages, right? And that's theory. But then they need the practical and the hands-on experience. Our apprenticeship model, it takes a long time to get a student from ground zero up to the point where they're fully functional in a plant and they have their ticket. What we're looking at right now and what the ministry is looking at is expediting that process. And how to expedite that process is through a continuous rotation between theory and in-class learning and then hands-on experience. And also the fact that when they're out in the field, when they're working as an apprentice, they need to have more they need to have more hands-on learning rather than just can you get me those tools? Can you help me out here? They need to be more engaged in the solving of the problems and the repairs.
I would just like to add to that quickly. I think it's a matter of education as well. And when I say education, I don't mean the formal sense of education. I think we need to educate industry and the population in general of what the future of work looks like. So if we need, and if we decide that in Canada we have a skills gap shortage, whether it's in tool and mold or tool and die or electricians, if we can show that there's a skills gap in 5 years' time where we're going to need an extra 50,000 of this or 50,000 of that, then people will ultimately go to the universities and trade schools to get that skill set. But we don't seem to be able to show that connection of what the future of work looks like. Many students today, especially at the higher learning centers, are learning skills for future industry that doesn't even exist. Look at all the startups today. Look at, again, Google, of course, Facebook, but look at all the other smaller startups today. Everyone's trying to build an app, right? So that's all an industry that wasn't there 20 years ago, 10 years ago. Same thing here. This industry has been there. We've had a great exodus of people. Wasim probably knows the numbers better than I do in terms of tool and die makers that have left the industry or have ultimately retired. We haven't had that next generation coming through at the same level. So if that is a gap that we've identified through industry, speaking with the educational organizations, then we should be able to educate the population in large masses to try to understand where those students should be going. We look at it again, just to add a little bit of what Nick had said earlier on. In Germany, they value that machinist or that tool and die maker equally as they do a mechanical engineer. Equally, they pay them, they remunerate them the same way, they respect them the same way, they reward them the same way, and they allow them to have the same amount of decision making on the shop floor. It's truly, truly an equal partnership. So, when they make those decisions, when they're age 13, 14 to decide whether they're going to higher learning or to trade school, it's not a decision made willy-nilly. It's made because they have an understanding of what the economy needs in 5 years' time when you're graduating.
Yeah,
I moved to Windsor in 1997. I went to a large technical high school in Richmond Hill, Ontario. It was probably one of the top technical high schools in the province. It was brand new, Bayview Secondary School, built in the early 60s. It had probably 15 or 20 absolutely spectacular technical shops. And my dad was a skilled trades guy. When I moved to Windsor, it was just when I think it was W.D. Lowe was being shut down.
Our school, by the way.
Yeah.
Our school.
Yeah. And I mean, I have to, and I had a meeting within a few weeks of getting here with both the public and Catholic boards, and they wanted to know, you know, what sort of things should they be teaching their students. And I said basically two things: employability skills, show them how to show up on time, be literate, collaborate, be polite, respectful, honest, and take the initiative, and teach them technical topics. And to be candid, I don't care whether they know how to run a CNC mill. I care if they know how to run a manual Bridgeport first, safely. The CNC mill, they'll learn that later. It'll be fine. There's no way the school system can keep up with industry, and they don't need to try that hard as long as they're getting the basis of those skills. And yet, there they were, shutting down the big technical high school in a city which makes its living with technology. And now, if you go out to Oldcastle in the south part of our city, Minister, you will see, you know, several dozen or several hundred tool and die shops, some of the best in the world, and each one of them will have a sign at the street saying CNC operator needed, CNC programmer needed, CNC this, CNC that, CNC the other thing. And the problem is, when we all went to school, most of us went to technical high schools. That's how we wound up in technology careers. If I go back to Bayview Secondary School now, I think the auto shop I learned about cars in is now a theater arts room. I like theater arts too, but it's harder to make a living with that, and it doesn't help the auto industry. And so if I could do one thing in Ontario, I would push the big red button on technical education once again at the high school level. We have basically gotten out of it, and it has hurt our economy, and it has hurt this city. And I think it was a mistake, and it's a mistake that must be corrected. And that will mean flexibility in teacher qualifications. My dad became a teacher in 1958 with a grade 12 education. He worked on his degree along the way, and he wound up with a master's degree. But you know, if you demand that every teacher have a university degree in the first place, you're basically shutting out people with skilled trades qualifications, because it's the 15 years in industry that really makes them a good shop teacher. And the kids that graduate from those programs in the big technical high schools, they go on to leadership positions in industry. Ray had a technical education. I did. He did. You know, this is where people come from to lead industry and become decision makers in technical professions. They get their start when they're 14 years old on a little manual lathe in some high school. And we don't have those anymore. And it's a big mistake. It's a huge failing of our education system. That and employability skills.
So Grace, the message for industry is the ministry is reviewing the apprenticeship programs now, so step up and provide your comments to them. Makes no sense to sit back. If you got issues, you got, you know, things that you can contribute to improving the program, step up.
Okay, our next question deals with trade deals. Is there data showing that trade agreements have resulted in auto production decline in Canada? That trade deals are a problem.
The Canadian economy builds 2.4 million cars a year, and we sell 1.9 million cars a year. Where are those other 500,000 cars going? I don't think they're parked underground somewhere. They must be going across a border. That's a trade deal.
Look, and I'll tell you this. I mean, if you look at it from a Southwestern Ontario perspective, you know, we had the auto pack way back in the 80s, right? Everyone knows enough about that. I'm not going to go look in the rearview mirror. The North American Free Trade Agreement was obviously negotiated for far more than just the auto industry. So the greater good in terms of how it impacts, the wheat industry in Regina, to Peter's earlier comment, or the fisheries in the Maritimes, or the lumber, pulp and paper industry in BC, is far different than how it impacts the auto industry. Unfortunately, for most of us in this audience here today, we're looking at it myopically, strictly through our own lenses with respect to the auto industry. No doubt we all have our own opinions of whether it helped us or hurt us. However, if you look at a country like Mexico, they have one of the largest number of free trade agreements across the world. Look at what has happened to their auto industry because of it. I'm not saying it was the sole ingredient, but it was certainly one of the key drivers of helping them build the auto industry that they have today.
For me, there's sort of an elephant in the room, and that's labor rates. And
Grace, just before we
sorry.
leave trade, I mean, this is an important thing because, and I think Mexico speaks for itself. I mean, this is why we heard the example earlier, why, a company located there was to capitalize on these. Literally, they have some of the most bilateral free trade agreements in the world. Not only that, geographically, they're located almost in the center of the earth, right? So it makes sense. But, it can affect production here, and it can affect new mandates here. Let's be clear. I mean, if we can't come up with the right formula to keep what we have, I mean, there's one thing that the free trade agreements will do is two things, I guess. One is it allows for those companies to go to other countries and do like many other companies are doing, which is simply build there and export into Canada from there. The key is how do we get global mandates so that we get a global mandate where we can capitalize on the free trade agreements that we have pursued and we have landed, and the Fort Edge is one example of that. CETA is an agreement which is probably one of the more modern types of agreements. It's one which recognizes the integration of our industry. And that allows us to capitalize on that. We just want the federal government to move forward with that more quickly. It's not the Canadian government's fault, it's the Europeans seem to be stuttering a bit. But where we develop a free trade agreement that recognizes the integration of our industry, where it promotes the industry domestically here and the products we sell elsewhere to greater access in these markets, that's the key. So it can work for you or it can work against you. And how you structure that agreement is the key. But it can work for you and it can work against you.
But when you think about Mexico, I'm sorry, did someone else want to jump in? When you think about Mexico and how it has flourished under NAFTA, has it not been able to capitalize on its lower labor rates with respect to NAFTA?
Well, yeah, I mean, there is no single silver bullet. It's not just the free trade agreements. It's not just lower labor costs. It's not just cheap energy. It's not just their location between North and South America, if you like. It's no one single thing. And again, when I came to Windsor, Mexico was, not there. But despite all the stuff that's happened there over the years, they're sure there now. So they've taken their advantages and emphasized them, and taken their disadvantages and de-emphasized them, and they've treated the whole thing as a key strategic asset for their country and its future. And they have driven very hard for the goal of becoming an automotive powerhouse, and it's worked. And that's what we have to do. And I've been in Mexico with government officials a number of times, and you see Mexican officials being very frank in self-assessment about their strengths and weaknesses. Sometimes they emphasize their strengths a little more than their weaknesses, but by golly, they're pretty frank about their weaknesses too. And I sometimes, with respect, don't see that here. We see officials saying, oh, we don't have an energy cost problem. Of course we do. Of course we do. The evidence is unmistakable. And so to deny it it shoots the rest of our case down because we're just not being frank. And I think, that's what Mexico has done. We need to emphasize our strengths and de-emphasize our weaknesses and play our hand much more astutely than we have. Again, I ask, how is it going for us? And that should give us guidance as to whether we can keep playing the same game as we have been.
Yeah, I don't think that, as Peter said, it's not a silver bullet there in terms of the labor cost. When we talk to OEMs or Tier 1 suppliers that have plants in Mexico, it's the efficiency and the effectiveness. There's a high turnover rate, and when you have high turnover, it leads to poor quality and it leads to poor efficiencies. But they've acknowledged that fact, and they're addressing it. They're reaching out to institutions in North America about training their employees. They're reaching out to us about training their employees. So when there's a need, they're identifying it and they're addressing it.
So Mexican companies are reaching out to St. Clair College for training? Could you elaborate on that?
Absolutely. They're reaching out to St. Clair College and many other North American institutions on training their skilled tradespeople down in Mexico. And so are the southern states in the United States, including BMW, that's reaching out to St. Clair College to say, can you help us? We have a skill mismatch in Ontario, in Windsor. They have a true skill gap in southern United States and in Mexico. But they're identifying it and they're dealing with it. And they're reaching out to areas of support that they can address the problem.
I'm just wondering what kind of opportunities does that kind of arrangement present or for our area, for the college, for the economy?
Basically, from our standpoint, it provides us the opportunity to provide training to students, to industry. We're gaining the experience in providing that corporate training to industry. Our doors are open to anybody, to local industry partners as well as international industry partners. We're a training organization, an academic institution, and when students come to our doors or industry comes to our doors, we welcome them and say, come on in, we want to help you, we want to train your workforce.
But Grace, it's just an example of how the automotive world is truly global. You know, Patty's here from St. Clair College as well, but several of us will remember 20, 30 years ago, the college was predominantly providing that service for the big three that was in the greater Windsor area. As the auto industry has become more global, those customers will come from all four corners of the world, and they will find the supply, wherever it may be, and ensure that they can tap into that supply to train their people, in using the example that Wasim just gave you, or whether it's in machine building, or whether it's in tool and die, or whether it's in CAD/CAM, or whether it's in product development. They will find that supply. So we have to understand that the industry is global, and the speed of technology and the way we can operate now with the internet and everything else, it makes his client base significantly different than it was 20 years ago.
I'd like to go back to the wage, your comments on wage, to be fair. So, of course, there's always going to be some impact wages have on business. I mean, some of my clients, some of the OEMs I work with, I see them actually moving some business out of China into Vietnam now because of wage, in some cases. But in other cases, you have to ask yourself a question and think about this. So Germany has very high wage rates. Let's be clear. But it works. Again, they have a distinct advantage over us. They have their own car companies that are part of the fabric of Germany. It who's who Germany is. They are BMW. They are the Volkswagen Group in Wolfsburg. Wolfsburg is Volkswagen. Ingolstadt is Audi. So this is a bit of a disadvantage. So we have to work around those things. You know, I asked some of the guys on the BMW board, why did you build in Leipzig, your last assembly plant, and not in Eastern Europe? I won't mention the names, but they just said, we're Germans. And Leipzig is in Eastern Germany, and it gave them pause, and I saw the emotion on their face. They took it very seriously and personally to support the former Eastern Germany. So it's something to be said and understood. So we don't have a car company, okay? We're on our own in that regard. So we got to work around those issues in our own country.
5 minutes? Describe in one word the state of mind that Canada needs to have to win.
Aggressive. Aggressive.
Relentless.
I'm going to use 2 words, fast-paced.
Unabating.
What's left?
You're last.
Well, no, I don't think we're desperate at all. I think, I think, Nick, you mentioned it. It's building it into the fabric of our being. Not one word, but I mean, that is what it's going to take, I think, and we're not there yet.
In our business, I don't know politics. I've never been a politician, but in our business, if you have a business unit, we either win or lose. We survive or we're gone. If you're running the division or the company or you're vice president, you either make money, you make profit, or you're gone. So I don't know if we're there yet in Canada. If we are all together working in that same way, we have to win. There's no alternative.
I think the takeaway from our team that we've spoken a number of times, offline as well as just prior to our meetings this morning, the takeaway from the panel, if I can sort of speak generally, is we need a strongly, comprehensively built Canadian automotive strategy that has all of those elements that we've spoken about, whether it's infrastructure, utilities, land, all of that collectively in the policy. And not just a document that's going to sit and collect dust, but actually something that we can execute against. That's the message from the panel.
And I think, again, you've heard so many aspects of it, right from, elementary and high school education, right through to an aggressive agency which has the power to negotiate, the authority to make decisions and commitments, and the muscle to be fast, agile, aggressive, relentless, and to be taken seriously by other, if you want to collaborate with Michigan, they have to take you seriously, and right now I'm not sure they do, or take us seriously. And so it's not just one single little thing. We need, I think, since I'm being very sincere about this, I think we need to change our elementary and high school education systems. The business where, if an assignment is due on the 10th of October, the kid can hand it in June for full credit. This is nonsense. No company could possibly function that way. Nobody in this room could run their business on that basis. And yet that's what we're teaching our children to do. And it's things like that. We've got to listen to the world. There is no happy little bubble over Windsor or Ontario that protects us from competing with the world, and we have to take it on as it is, not as we want it to be.
Grace, I'd just say something, that in 2008 and 9, the federal and provincial government came together at a very, very critical time. Why? Because they saw the potential consequences of the downfall of the Canadian auto industry. They also worked very closely with the U.S. government. They made a decision that was very difficult political decision, but they made it because they knew that if 2 companies went down, the entire supply chain would go down. And the interesting observation there is that even those other companies, such as the Toyotas and the Hondas and the Fords of the world, who were not part of that, fully supported the fact that those companies that were subject, to or needed the help, got the help. We're at a point in time where it's no different now. The seriousness of where we are must be dealt with. And people say, I keep hearing this, well, geez, we're this auto fatigue and the auto industry, God, they got these handouts. No, there was a return on a very legitimate investment. And those investments provide those returns in unprecedented turnaround times, and it was less than 3 years and made more than double in 8 years. So all I'm saying is I don't think we're at a point in time where we should be politicians, government should be looking at this any differently than that time. Companies aren't going to go under, but the future is where we need to be, and the decision is just as serious now as it was then.
This ends our panel discussion. Before we return to our seats, please give our panel another round of applause. Thank you all.
I want to, on behalf of the Windsor-Essex Regional Chamber of Commerce and our whole group, to give Grace Macaluso a round of applause for just an outstanding job. Thank you, Grace. That was fantastic. You did a super job.
So if we can, I think we've realized that it takes many people to really come together to talk about the very hard conversation that we're having in order to make sure that we're keeping focused on the automotive sector. So I want to just say thanks once again to our panelists, because they did an amazing job talking about the hard issues. And again, you can see how experienced they are and involved with their business and know the issues. But apart from that, it takes a lot of individuals in the community to really participate to try to drive this ship. So I want to recognize all the politicians, all the individuals, all the representatives at different levels of government that are here. Taras Nanashak, Lisa Gretzky, Percy Hatfield, members both from Tracy Ramsey's office are here. She was not able to attend, and either Brian Moss, but there are representatives from their office that are here. I'd like to recognize Tom Bain. Also, I'd like to recognize Mayor Dilkins and two city councilors that I've seen here, and I'm sorry if I've missed anybody else, Paul Borelli and Hillary Payne. So thank you all for participating and being here today in this event. Last but not least, obviously, I'd like to recognize our past national president that's obviously here. He's in the city and the hospitals running around all the time, Ken Loenza. So thank you very much for participating.
It is my privilege to introduce Jerry Dias, who's going to say a few words. Sun News called him one of the most fearsome people in the country. Maclean's called him one of the most powerful. The women at the Halton Women's Shelter, with whom he works closely, call him a great ally. And members of Unifor, Canada's newest private sector union, are proud to call him their first national president. Dias leads Unifor's ambitious efforts to help change the country into one in which we can all benefit from good jobs, safe communities, and a prosperous, inclusive economy. Jerry began his life's work in 1978 at the then de Havilland Aircraft, now Bombardier, where he served as a steward, plant chair, and eventually president of Local 112. In 1993, he was appointed to the union's national staff as the aerospace sector coordinator. In 2007, he was appointed assistant to CAW national president. Jerry is an effective negotiator who has taken on corporate giants from General Motors to Boeing to Coca-Cola. He has led numerous campaigns, including many that have prevented workplace closures and others that have led to the implementation of important improvements for workers' safety and rights. Please welcome to the podium, Jerry Dias.
I can't talk without using my hands. Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for coming here today. This is an incredibly important beginning for the type of discussion we need across this country if we are going to have a strong, effective industry. I listened intently to the panel because when the labor movement, or Unifor, talks about a lack of an auto strategy, if we're critical, then we're perceived as being Neanderthals. We're self-serving. We just don't get it. So those that have that perception, I would suggest, please, listen to the academic community. Listen to the business community. Listen to the innovators. Listen to those that know how to create jobs and have skin in the game. Because they can tell you what is needed in order to create jobs in this country. Corporate welfare, holding Canadians to ransom. Why give profitable companies any money at all? That's what we're dealing with. That's the type of mentality we're dealing with here. And with that type of a mentality, you won't have any sort of an economic strategy, I would suggest. $20 million a day to the Canadian economy. $5.2 million a day in payroll and income tax. 125,000 direct jobs. 400,000 indirect jobs. And we can go right through the whole list. I want to tell you a little story. In 1978, when I started at de Havilland, I was going to go to university. And I applied at Brock, York, and Windsor. And I got accepted. If you can imagine, the standards were low in those days. And I wanted to go to Windsor. And I wanted to go to Windsor because I wanted to be a phys ed teacher, and they had the best program. And they needed short phys ed teachers back in those days, so I thought I had a leg up. So I said to my parents, I want to go to Windsor. And my father, not being very diplomatic, says, you're not bloody going to Windsor, you're going to York. And that was the end of the discussion because he was rather arbitrary, and he still is, candidly, at 86. And I tell you this story because 2 months later, Bob White asked him to join the staff of the old UAW, and he went to work in Windsor. So I said, great, Dad, good move. Anyway, I tell you this story because they ended up buying a house in Forest Glade. And a couple of years later, I remember coming to visit my parents, and he was having one raging argument with the neighbor. Why? Because Ford was going to build the Essex plant down the road. And the neighbor was saying, oh my God, it's going to lead to all this traffic. And my father was saying, listen, you fool, it's going to lead to all these jobs. So that was in the late 70s, and I believe the plant opened in 1982. And I think that's probably the last major investment, and I'm talking about a greenfield site in the area. And I tell you this story because in 2014, we had a whole different debate. And the debate is about how do we bring the Dragon engine program to the Essex plant to stabilize it, 1,000 jobs, and the impact it would have had on the community. And what 2014 showed us is what we need to do in order to win. Our weaknesses were exposed because we're a nation that didn't have a strategy. We didn't have a one-stop shopping. We had obstacles. And we lost the project for a whole host of reasons. But I would suggest to you, as the panelists have talked about, the reason we lost the program is because of choices we make. Choices we make as a nation. We talked about Germany. We talked about Japan. We've talked about Brazil. We've talked about Mexico. We've talked about nations around the world that have a successful industry. But you know why they're successful? Because of choices. And then last week, I was here in Windsor celebrating the Pacifica. And what is the Pacifica? A hybrid, electric, leading edge, technologically advanced vehicle. And we were critical. And why were we critical? Because we knew that the $2 billion investment in Windsor actually would have probably been about a $3.6 billion investment and would have given us a paint shop in Brampton. I say this because Fiat Chrysler went alone. And we are going to have an incredible facilities, and we have an incredible facilities, and we're going to have a long future here in Windsor. But we could have done more, and we could have stabilized the thousands of jobs in Brampton. So I want to read to you the comments in Bill Morneau's budget. Because we have a new government in town, and I'm telling you, I'm very pleased about the opportunities that we have today that we never had in the last 10 years. So what did he say in his first budget? The automotive industry is among Canada's leading employers and exporters, valued at $17 billion per year and directly employing more than 125,000 Canadians from automotive assembly to parts production. As the global automotive industry is evolving towards the production of cleaner, more connected vehicles, Canada has an opportunity to apply its strengths in areas such as lightweighting and information and communications technologies to designing and building the cars of the future. Budget 2016 announces the extension of the Automotive Innovative Fund, which is currently scheduled to sunset at the end of 2017-18 through the end of 2020-21. In the coming months, the Minister of Innovation, Science and Development will work in collaboration with the Government of Ontario and industry stakeholders to raise the profile of Canada's strong capabilities and better influence investment locations, and it goes on and on and on. What we got in the budget was an extension of a failed program. What we got was an extension of a program that all of us in this room know doesn't work. So I'm not saying this to be critical, because I absolutely, firmly believe that the government understands it. I believe that Morneau's comments weren't just rhetoric, that in fact they understand. So now what we need to do is move forward. Because we have discussed what is wrong, what our challenges are, what we need to do. But 2016 is now a time for action. Because I will suggest to you today and argue that 2016 will determine whether or not there is an industry. 2016 will be the year where the major OEMs are going to have to make decisions. And I listened to Steve Rogers' presentation. And Steve says that we are going to go from 2.26 million vehicles assembled to 1.94. We were number 4 in the world in vehicle manufacturing, and we are heading down to number 15, based on the presentation. I'm here to tell you that Steve Rogers is wrong. We are not going down to 1.94 million vehicles. And we are not going to be number 15, because we are going to put our collective line in the sand in 2016. Because we know what's going to happen if General Motors does not invest in Oshawa, if they don't give us a product. They will close the assembly plant, because 1.94 million vehicles means there's no Oshawa. If we don't find a way to ensure that Ford invests in Windsor, then we're going to have a long-term problem with our engine operations. If Chrysler does not invest in a 30-year-old paint shop in Brampton, then we have a problem. So I'm saying, and I'm not being bold, I'm not being aggressive, I'm not being difficult, I'm being straight. So this is now about the federal government, the provincial government, the academia, and the labor movement. Because everybody has to look for the solutions, and we know what the solution is. So when I say, and I'm critical, I'm also understanding that we need to look in a mirror. So I'm not passing the blame, but I'm talking about us putting together a collaborative resolution. Because we know what our weaknesses are. We know we can do this, by the way. I'm very comfortable knowing that Ray Tanguay, frankly, is working together to pull together a one-stop shopping. Why? Because we need this. And I'm so happy that Deb Matthews is here, because the Ontario government understands their role. And I understand that the federal government and the bureaucrats, of course, are here, and they understand their role. So we can do this. So I just want to end my remarks by saying there's challenges. The TPP is a challenge. The Korea Free Trade Deal is a challenge. And by the way, I understand the importance of trade deals, and the comments are dead on. 85% of the vehicles that we build here in Canada are exported. So we understand the importance of trade. We need more trade. We need fair trade. You see, the Korea trade deal, and here's when we get critical, and I want to talk in broader terms. The Koreans identified, as the Japanese have, of the importance of their export industry, the important role of the auto industry. So Canada goes into the Korea trade deal, and frankly, they export 135,000 vehicles a year to Canada. We ship a few hundred to Korea. Does anybody believe that we are now going to start shipping vehicles to Korea? Or are they going to start to ship more here? From January 2015 to today, imports from Korea to Canada have gone up 9%. Exports from Canada to Korea have gone down 4%. The TPP, the Japanese ship 159,000 vehicles a year to Canada. We ship a few hundred. We are now going to remove the 6.1% tariff in 5 years. In the United States, it's going to take 25 and 30 years. Even Malaysia and other countries negotiated better terms than us. Why? Because the Japanese understand the importance of their auto industry and put into place a trade deal to enhance it. Do we honestly believe we are now going to start shipping more vehicles to Japan? So I'm not an anti-trade person. I'm about common sense trade. I'm about saying that if the Japanese are going to send 159,000 vehicles a year to Canada, are you telling me we can't start to ship our Canadian-made Pacificas to Japan? So it's really about putting into place economic strategies that make sense. So we're hearing the debate about cap and trade. We're hearing the debate about CAFE. And that's all important. So I would suggest that when governments introduce policies that make sense, then they should work with us to make sure that their policies are doable. Because we need to transform ourselves. We need to transform the industry. We need to transform our economy. And you can't transform the economy by taking away the #1 export industry in the country. So if we are going to have cap and trade, then we need to make sure that everybody plays by the same rules. If we're going to work with certain standards, then we need to make sure that countries around the world that have access to the Canadian economy live by the same rules. Because if we agree with the CAFE standards and we agree with what needs to be done, well then we should be comfortable investing to make sure that it is a reality. So I just want to end my remarks today by saying that I'm encouraged. I'm enthused because we're going to get this right. This type of a forum needs to happen across the country. 2016 is going to be our year. And I say this with confidence and conviction. You know why? Because we're aggressive. We're going to be assertive. We're going to be all of those things that the panelists said that is necessary in order for us to be successful. I want to thank you all very much. I want to thank all the presenters who are here today, because your presentations and your commitment are going to make my comments and the comments of the panelists a reality. Thank you all very much.
So I want to just take a moment to thank Jerry Dias, National President of Unifor, taking time out of his busy schedule to come here today and address the Policy and Solutions Forum. Thank you very much for those words of encouragement, and we look forward to doing more work collaboratively in the future. Going on to the next item on our agenda, recognizing an individual from the Canadian Chamber. He is the Chamber President, Perrin Beatty. The Honorable Perrin Beatty is the President and CEO of the 200,000 member Canadian Member of Commerce, Canada's largest and most representative national business association. Perrin is the principal spokesperson advocating the policy positions of the Canadian Chamber's members to the federal government, international organizations, the media, and the general public. Prior to joining the Canadian Chamber in August 2007, Perrin was the president and CEO of the Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters. Beatty grew up in Fergus, Ontario, and graduated from the University of Western Ontario in 1971. In 1972, he was elected to the House of Commons as a progressive conservative, and in 1979, he was appointed Minister of State in the government of Joe Clark. He held numerous portfolios in subsequent progressive conservative governments, and from 1995 to 1999, Perrin was president and CEO of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation. He has also served on a number of Canadian government advisory committees, is currently a member of the Advisory Council of the Canadian Defence and Foreign Affairs Institute, and a member of the Board of Directors for Mitsui Canada. Please help me welcome Perrin Beatty.
Dino, thank you very much for that gracious introduction. And let me take a moment just at the beginning of my remarks to single out you and Matt for the leadership that you've provided. What I've seen this morning with the working together of business and labor, the academic sector, governments, is an example of what we need to do across the country. And you really have provided an example of what we can do to make Canada more competitive and more successful. So I salute both of you for the leadership that you've provided. We're here to talk about the future of Canada's automotive sector, and some people say there isn't one. I'm not one of those. I believe that a strong manufacturing sector is absolutely critical for the success of Canada in the future, and that needs to be our starting point. My background is from a manufacturing family, and I've seen over the years the contribution that manufacturing has made to Canada's economy and to creating opportunities for young Canadians looking to create bright futures for themselves. And at the core of that, particularly in this province, has been our auto sector. This must continue to be a critical part of Canada's and of Ontario's future as we look forward to the next many decades ahead of us. It was 2 weeks from today, it will have been 55 years ago to the day that President Kennedy stood before the Congress of the United States and committed the United States to putting an American on the moon and bringing him safely home within 10 years. They did that 8 years later. At the time that Kennedy made that commitment, nobody knew that the United States would be successful in doing that. All that Kennedy knew was if he didn't make the commitment, it wouldn't be done. That's where we stand today. What we're hearing from business, from labor, from all of the presenters who spoke today, is that we need to commit ourselves in Canada and Ontario to the development of a Canadian automotive strategy to ensure not only that we protect the jobs that we have today, but that we continue to grow them for the future. That this industry is restored to vibrant health and can grow in the future. And what I heard was optimism. I heard realism in terms of what the challenges are that we face. And the challenges are severe. We all know them, and I'll talk about some of those. But I also heard a sense of optimism that we have a very strong base on which we can build if we're determined to do it. So the starting point for any national automotive strategy in Canada is a clear and unequivocal statement that automotive manufacturing is here to stay in Canada for good. And our commitment, business, labor, the academic sector, governments at all levels, needs to be that we will do what is necessary to make that happen. And we can do it. We've demonstrated the capacity. A couple of weeks ago, I had the privilege of meeting with Ray Tanguay in my office in Ottawa. We talked about some of the challenges. We talked about the opportunities. And Ray set out for me the tremendous base from which we're operating here. Highly skilled workforce. Companies that have well-established records in terms of the quality of products that they're producing. Our positioning in terms of the market, in terms of geography. With so many opportunities that we have to build upon. Major challenges, but great opportunities as well. And I had the privilege a few weeks before that of meeting with Steve Carlisle, who had just been speaking to the Economic Club of Canada in Ottawa to a sold-out audience where he was talking about the connected car of the future and talking about the importance of innovation within the sector. And what we heard again today, and it started with Steve talking as he introduced the subject today, about the importance of innovation. We cannot drive into the future with our eyes firmly fixed on the rearview mirror. We have to be committed to being a country founded on innovation. And this sector will succeed in Canada if we continue to innovate. Grace put an important question to the panelists. Do we want to support assembly jobs that we have today, or do we want to be involved in the car of the future? My answer is yes. We need to do both. And we can do both. And we have to be focused on what is necessary to make that happen. How do we create in Canada, and particularly here in southwestern Ontario, the conditions that are necessary to enable us to succeed in the future? We heard about skills. We need to have a 21st century workforce. It means business, labor, governments, the educational sector have to work together to ensure that we have the skills base in this country that will enable us to succeed. We heard about the importance of the trades in Canada and the fact that we devalue the contribution that's made by members of the trades. We need to change that. We need to focus on ensuring that we celebrate the contributions and the skills that these people offer to the Canadian economy. We need to look at the cost structure in Canada. It's not just the automotive sector. The Canadian Chamber represents some 200,000 businesses in Canada, large, small, every sector, every region of the country. It really is Main Street Canada. But when I go out and when I talk to companies across the country, and particularly to multinational companies located here, they often refer to Canada as a high-cost country in which to do business. When they refer to that, they're not simply referring to pay. And let's make it very clear. Our goal as a country and our goal as employers should not be how do we drive down the wages that we're paying to our employees. Our goal should be to ensure high-paid jobs for the future and opportunities for young Canadians. Others have proven it can be done. The Germans have demonstrated that. But we need to demonstrate that we can have the productivity for every dollar that we put in, and that we can get the economic growth that is necessary to enable us to continue to be competitive. And we need a strategy for doing that. It is not que sera, sera. It is not ad hoc. It's not a matter that it will happen by itself spontaneously. That's why we need this strategy. We need to look honestly, critically at ourselves, say, what are we doing right? What are we doing wrong? What do we need to do to get to where we want to be in the future, to have this secure future for our kids? What do we need to do in the educational system? What do we need to do in terms of looking at costs? We've heard some of them discussed today. Ontario is one of the highest cost jurisdictions for electricity anywhere in North America. That is a factor that affects manufacturers at all levels, as well as many other sectors as well. This was years ago a competitive advantage that Ontario industry had. Today it's a disadvantage. We have to deal with that honestly. We need to look at government regulations and policies. I am strongly in favor of bringing in measures to deal with climate change. All of us have to do whatever we can to make a difference there. But it's important that we have a collaborative strategy to make that happen. If we simply shift jobs across the border to somewhere else, we don't improve the global climate. All we do is make ourselves weaker in the process. So we need a collaborative strategy there as well. And we need to ensure that it makes sense in the economic climate in which we are operating in Canada. We do need, the issue of trade agreements has come up. We need to ensure that we take down barriers, both within Canada and between Canada and the rest of the world. Barriers that today impede the export, the movement of people, the movement of goods, of investment, and that we open up markets for Canadians. But we need to be honest with ourselves as well and recognize that in any trade negotiations, by definition, they're a process of give and take. And it's critical for our governments to work with the sectors that are affected to ensure that we mitigate the impact of that and that we work to ensure the health of all of our sectors, that we take advantage of the new openings that we have and that we assist those industries that may be negatively affected. This is an automotive producing region of Canada, but it's also a wine producing region. What we learned from the Free Trade Agreement in 1988 was that by the sector working together with government, we could build something that was stronger and better. And today we have more acres under cultivation, we're winning awards, the sector is more profitable than ever before in the wine sector. We need to have the same strategy as we talk trade in the industrial sector, including in the automotive sector. We need to look at the costs that are imposed by the border between Canada and the United States. We've made progress. It is better than it was after 9/11, but it is still too costly and too sticky when automobiles produced here cross the border in various stages of production several times, adding costs each time that they do it. Why do we impose these costs on ourselves? What can we do to take them down? How do we make ourselves more competitive? We have to fight protectionism in the United States. We are watching on this side of the border what's happening across the border. We've seen protectionism with Buy America, with Keystone XL that dragged on for longer, dragged on for 7 years before finally we got a negative answer on it. We've seen it with country of origin labeling that's affected our agricultural products. And we're seeing today at least one of the candidates, Mr. Trump, talking about taking unilateral action against trading partners. Surely if there's something that we've learned over the course of generations, it's that nobody wins a trade war. And we need to do what we can do together to keep the border open, to keep it fluid, and to look for ways in which we can strengthen all of our economies. We don't win across this border when we're drilling holes in the hull of the other side of the boat where the other guy's sitting. We're in it together. The point was made powerfully that this is an important economic region, that the economies of the Great Lakes regions on both sides of the border are closely linked. We need to be far more strategic in terms of working together to ensure that we're successful in growing the economy on both sides of the border, and we can do that. We can take on the world, and we can win if we work together. I don't know how many of you read the article in the Wall Street Journal last week. They ran a story entitled "Why Silicon Valley Recruiters Are Flocking to Ontario." And they talked about the University of Waterloo and their program and how they pointed out that University of Waterloo's graduates are the second most frequently hired in Silicon Valley behind students from the University of California, Berkeley. Way ahead of other regions in the United States. And yet, too often, we have this Canadian inferiority complex that we can't compete. We're not as good as somebody else. We keep on shooting for the bronze instead of going for the gold. We need to set our sights higher. Yes, the University of Waterloo does an outstanding job. So do other educational institutions right across Ontario. And if we work together strategically, we can win. And that needs to be our goal. Not a gentleman's C. We need to shoot for excellence. And we need to be number one. And we can do that. We need to set our sights firmly on the future and on what our needs are. More than anything else, what we need is collaboration. The sort of talking that you've started here in Windsor that crosses traditional boundaries to look for common solutions when we recognize we're all in the boat together. We need to extend this nationally to develop a national sense of purpose. For our part at the Canadian Chamber, we commit ourselves to working with you to reach out to colleagues in government, in labor, the academic sector, and elsewhere to help to build Canada's economy, develop plans which will make us stronger in the future, and to ensure that all of our children, who are the most important element in our society, our kids, to make sure that our kids have the hope of a bright future in exactly the same way as we've been privileged to live in this incredibly rich and diverse and successful country. Thank you so much.
On behalf of the Windsor-Essex Regional Chamber of Commerce and our friends in the labor community, Perrin, that was an outstanding chat you just gave us, very inspiring. We're so happy to have you as part of our chamber network. Perrin is an outstanding leader for us across the country. We're so happy that you took time out today to visit with us and share your message with us. Perrin's been a great leader for us, and he's a great advocate for Windsor-Essex and Ottawa. He's one of our go-to guys along with our MPs. So, Perrin, thank you very much for all of your hard work on behalf of Windsor-Essex and on part of the region, and as your role as Canadian Chamber President. Outstanding.
So what we want to do now, moving on to the rest or ending our program, because, I mean, when we really started this conversation probably about a year and a half ago, and we started looking at what we should do and what a policy and solutions forum would look like, me and Matt really tried to reach as far as we could with regards to getting individuals, so to speak, on board and organizations. And again, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the University of Windsor and St. Clair College for all their dedication, their hard work, and participating in the initiatives that we put forward through this Policy and Solutions Forum. But at the same time, the first meeting that we had with Deb Matthews' office was, I thought, a great meeting. It was a pretty amazing meeting, to say the least. It was at the local 444 hall. Matt, myself, and Chris Taylor from Local 200 were there. And the reason why I wanted to touch on that is because the first thing that I remember, and every time I think back to the meeting, is how amazed Deb Matthews was with the collaborative effort that labor, that business came together and trying to talk about how we can bridge the gap and how we can make things better working collaboratively instead of working individually in our silos. And we need to make that room bigger. We need to get more groups in line and with us with regards to at least having the hard conversation. So with that said, I want to thank Deb Matthews for all her hard work and her time through her office, through Landon Tresis. And I'd like to ask Deb Matthews and Ray Tengay to come up and please say a few words to help us close this event. Also, I should probably recognize that Ray Tengay, as the automotive advisor, is an alumni of distinction of St. Clair College, where he did receive his technical background, so we do share that in common. So thank you very much. Thank you, Rose.
Well, thanks so much. It's really, truly wonderful to be here today. I remember, Dino, that meeting very, very well, and you captured it exactly as I remember it. I was kind of really taken aback by how collaborative the relationship was between labor and the business community. And today just really demonstrates how far that that spirit of we're all in this together is just getting stronger and stronger. So I have to say, Windsor, I've always known Windsor was a very special place. Today, I know it more than I ever have before, because we all know that that we are all in this together, and that we are facing a challenge, and that this is a really important year. As Jerry said, 2016 is a really important year. We have to get our act together. We have to do this together. You know, 500,000 Ontarians and their families depend on us getting this right. The auto sector is such a huge driver of our economy. It is unthinkable that we not move forward stronger and better than ever before. We've heard there's a lot of work ahead to make sure that that we do have a healthy, thriving, world-class auto sector. But what I've learned today is that we actually have a really good idea of what we have to do to make that a success. So failure is not an option. We are successful. I want you to know that the provincial government is very much engaged in this. We know how important this is, and you're going to hear from Ray in a moment, but we know that we need to have that strategy, and we need to implement that strategy, and we're prepared to invest in that strategy, as we have done in the past. So I apologize. I do have notes of a speech I'm supposed to make, but I'm not going to make it because I want to reflect a bit on some of the things that I've heard from the panel today. You know, when I heard the words, what's the one word that needs to describe our attitude as we move forward? And the words aggressive, relentless, unabating, fast-paced. Like, there's an urgency here that we all need to reflect. This is not a time to rest on our laurels. This is a time to really challenge the status quo. When I hear Steve Rogers, who actually graduated from a high school in London, Ontario, the very year that I graduated from a high school in London, Ontario. He went to Westminster, I went to Lucas. We kind of had a bit of a rivalry, but it's great to be here with you, Steve. But when Steve says, the car will change more in the next 10 years than it has in the past 120. That's a big statement. And that's a statement that really demonstrates that we need all of our great minds, our innovation, that Canadian championship zeitgeist to really drive in the auto sector. There's a lot riding on this. So this is a time of fantastic innovation. This is not an industry for the faint of heart. This is not where we will be looking backwards. It's where we will be looking forward, and we need to embrace that this is a rapidly changing industry. And as I say, we're all in it together. We do have some tremendous advantages, and our labor force, our highly skilled labor force, our stable labor force. That's an interesting piece that, our workers stay in the jobs. Other jurisdictions, there's a tremendous turnover. Mexico, 23% of people, is that what you told me? Yes? 23% of people leave, that's the turnover annually. So having that stable workforce is a huge advantage. I heard loud and clear that we need to do a better job in our education system, that we really have to invest in making sure that kids in high schools get that foundation that they need to move into the trades and to move into the skilled trades. And that's a big priority for us as a government, but I think there's more opportunity to do a lot more. But I do want to say we've made tremendous gains, and we were elected in 2003. The graduation rate high school graduation rate was 68%. 68% of students graduated within 5 years. We set a goal that some said was a ridiculously ambitious goal that we hit 85. Well, a couple of weeks ago, we've now hit 85.5. So from 68% graduation rate to 85.5, in large part because we are investing in those programs that keep kids engaged in school. They're there because they want to be, and they want to be there because they're actually learning skills that matter to them. So I'm going to consider you a resource person on what we need to do more to give kids that foundation in technology. I also heard that the government will do what government can do, but industry needs to step up too. And the culture of apprenticeship that we know exists in other jurisdictions is something we have to build here. And that will happen only if industry embraces the responsibility to train the next generation of workforce. I heard about red tape, and the timing for that is perfect because right now, as we speak, if you Google Ontario Red Tape Challenge, you will see that we now have online, it closes the end of the month, so you only have 3 weeks to participate in this, a red tape challenge focusing on the auto sector. We're going out and asking people, we're not doing the traditional talk to the experts, although we're talking to the experts. We're talking to people who work in industry, who have a perspective. What can we do to cut down the red tape? And I was just taking a look at the website, because you can see what recommendations people are making, and you can comment on that. It's a very exciting thing. So if you haven't, in fact, I'm going to challenge you to do it today. Take a look at the Ontario Red Tape Challenge Auto Sector, and I look forward to you all participating, because I know you all have good advice for us on how to cut red tape, because that's what we need to do. I note that the conference is called Policy and Solutions Forum. And I think that solutions piece is really, really important, because we can talk over and over and over again about the problems. We really need to zero in on the solutions, because we all have the same goal. And so let's bring all of our wisdom and all of our perspectives together to really focus on the solutions. And the Red Tape Challenge, if you're interested, I really advise you to participate in that. I heard a lot, and I've heard a lot in the past about this the importance of making it easier for people who want to invest here to invest here. And that's something that Ray Tanguay is charged with telling us how to do that better. But this one-stop shop, where the pro-Mexico model, where people who want to invest can actually have the welcome mat rolled out for them, is something that we at the provincial level are very committed to doing. And we've asked Ed Clark and his advisors to help us with this. Ray Tanguay is helping us with this. So we're looking forward to actually making some measurable improvement on this. So I've heard tremendous optimism. I've heard that we're all ready to roll up our sleeves to work together to put any historic divisions behind us, because we care about this, and we care about our kids, and we care about our grandkids. Before I wrap up, I just want to talk a little bit about cap and trade, about our commitment on climate change. And I can tell you that we are absolutely committed to doing our part to bring down greenhouse gas emissions. That's not debatable. That's what we're doing. And we're doing it because it's essential for the planet that we do it. But we are going to do it in a way that is thoughtful and that meets our economic requirements too. So we are moving forward thoughtfully in consultation with industry to make sure we get to where we need to get to without leaving destruction in our wake. And I know there's been some discussion recently about whether Ontario will be moving forward with the California or Quebec style of mandatory sales targets for electric vehicles, for zero emissions vehicles. And I'm here to absolutely state clearly that we will not be following Quebec and California on that. So if anyone was worried about that, you need not worry. But we are going to encourage consumers to switch to electric vehicles. We are going to build infrastructure of recharging stations. We are providing incentives for purchasers, but the consumers have to come to that decision themselves, with lots of support from industry and from government. So I just want to conclude by thanking Dino and the Chamber and everybody who has made this a success. The universities here, the colleges here, everybody who has something to do with this industry is here today. You are a model, and I really admire the approach you're bringing to this, and we will find the solutions so that we will gather again and really celebrate the successes we've been able to achieve by working together. Thank you so much. I just realized I'm taking somebody else's pages. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you very much for organizing this event. I mean, the time couldn't be more perfect. And about 2 weeks, the Executive Committee of CAPC, that's the Canadian Automotive Partnership Council, we're going to come together and start to look at all the priorities that we need to put in place. So when I look at you're giving a lot of advice to an advisor. So, but this is very important because I've, in the past 9 months, I've collected a lot of information, and a lot of the things that you brought to the front today with the panel. Thank you very much for all your comments that you made. They're very valuable for me because as I go and write the report and try to reflect of all of the recommendations or advice that I receive, it adds more value because it's not an opinion from one person, it's an opinion from a large group of people that care about the auto industry. So I graduated in 1972 and I worked for 43 years. I could easily justify a good retirement. But my passion was so much for this auto industry is that I want to make sure that I continue to support the auto industry because I've been involved with the Canadian Automotive Partnership Council. We made those recommendations, but I was frustrated because I didn't feel that we did implement the recommendation as quickly as we should. Because we've made those comments 10 years ago, 3 years ago, and then so when it came down to time for retirement, I said, we're not done yet. And I was afraid that if I just retire, that they would go underneath the rug and there would not be as much attention. So today you give me a lot of advice. And right now my next phase is to develop the business plan. So people talk about the strategy. I want to look at the business plan. I need to look at all the elements of how we're going to develop a combination to win. So as I'm the closer, I'd like to connect to the opening comments made by Dr. Watermans. And he talks about value. At the end of the day, we have to provide value. We have to have a proposition that is better than other jurisdictions because we can't attract investment just because of the size of our market. We are dependent to provide products in other jurisdictions. So therefore, we can't work alone. We have to work with partners. We have to think about the Great Lakes. The Great Lakes is about 8 million vehicles being produced. It's still the largest cluster. We have to think about what we can learn from Germany. So all these items over here are very important in our strategy and our business plan that we need to develop. My frustration last year when I went to Traverse City, we were not on the list of site selectors. We were not on the list of places where the auto industry is going to invest. And then all the predictions was about a decline. And I'm with Jerry on this one. We don't want to let that happen. We have to work together. We have to make sure we're competitive. So when we say about value, obviously cost is a very big thing, but also the technology that we have available. But the best asset we have is the people. We have great people. And it's not only about the engineers and it's right from the ground. When we engage an educated workforce to solve problems, we got more power than any other jurisdictions in the world. We have the best trades and the best engineers. That's why the Silicon Valley is trying to pull some of our brain drained into their area. Our job is making sure that we invest over here, not only from a government point of view, but the industry also has to invest. We have to invest in the facilities. We have to invest in the people. That's where the winning combination will come. But I'm willing to give more of my time to trying to bring this to a closure. But always, we're going to have to continue working, even after I retire, to think about how we're going to have a winning combination. Winning is the only solution. Thank you very much for doing this today. Thank you, Matt.